So the new members of President Cyril Ramaphosa's cabinet have been sworn in, or rather affirming to the faithful of the Republic to respect and uphold the Constitution. That's following that cabinet reshuffle we saw earlier this week. However, some believe that last week's reshuffle is more about clearing President Cyril Ramaphosa's path to a second term in office than actually cleaning out corruption within the executive. So with the political stakes running high and the president under pressure to inspire confidence, is this new cabinet fit for purpose? Let's unpack this for you now. Bring in our guests. Asanda Ngoasheng is an analyst, as well as Matlala Setlhalogile, who is a political risk analyst. In just a moment, Oliver Dickson also appears to have joined us. He, of course, is a commentator. To all three of our guests, thanks very much indeed for making time. It's lovely to have you on the program. Let's begin with a broad stroke take of what we make of this new executive. I've been punting the question throughout the program. I better get on and actually ask it. Asanda, is this a cabinet fit for purpose, or one that only ensures the political survival of the president?
No, I don't think this is fit for purpose at all. I think it's actually more about Cyril Ramaphosa consolidating his power. If you look at how he's taken intelligence and put it in the presidency, that's just yet another indicator that what he's trying to do is make sure that the people that he trusts are closest to him. And if you look at who is the Minister of Intelligence, it just tells you about the fact that it's not fit for power, because Zizi Kodwa has come as far as being at the at the Zondo Commission, talking about his involvement in corruption and claiming he has friends who love him enough to give him R1 million to buy a Jeep, which really showed him to be compromised and showed him to be somebody who's easily influenced by those in power if they have the money. And so I don't think that it was about, brand South Africa and making sure that South Africa is on the right track. If you look at who has been retained, Bheki Cele, who technically refused to arrest Jacob Zuma, has been retained. You've got Ayanda Dlodlo also still in power. And so all the people who failed us at a time when we needed them the most in the security cluster have been retained, except for Nosiviwe. And then I think if you look at who is the Minister of Finance, we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel, because Enoch Godongwana is not the best candidate, I don't believe. He left the Eastern Cape in a cloud of corruption, left his last position in 2012 under another cloud of corruption, and now he's risen to the second most important seat in South Africa, because the number one seat is the presidency. Maybe, I suppose, there's some power in the deputy presidency, but the third most important is the finance sector. And if we're putting somebody who has been under a cloud of corruption allegations that still have not been cleared, he really is not giving a good message, particularly if we think about the fact that we've got a lot of PPE scandals that need to be dealt with. We've got a lot of other scandals with the Zondo Commission still continuing, and now you have this new commission which is also supposed to look at who was in charge of the coup that or the coup attempt that we've just had. And if you look at even how things are playing out, you've got the SABC, that now there's been confirmation that the SANDF will be at the SABC. You've got allegations that there will be spying. It's not even allegations, actually, it's in people's contracts that there's going to be spying. Highly problematic. Securitization of the state. Maybe Cyril Ramaphosa won't abuse his power, but we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And what Jacob Zuma has taught us is to always be cautious and rather err on the side of caution, because once you start consolidating, particularly intelligence, particularly state power, and particularly security tools within the presidency, you have the makings of a security state. And that is not a healthy thing. That is not a good thing for a democracy. And if you look at all the other people that have been brought in, it's ANC recycling people all over again. You've got the former, well, I suppose she was the Speaker of Parliament, now coming into the Defence Force. Very few new faces, very few people who I feel have been chosen based on their competence and their ability to actually lead. Even the decision to move, Sisulu from her ministry to tourism, and then remove getting into tourism, from tourism to another ministry, it just says somebody who is a little bit insecure and really is just trying to consolidate power rather than thinking about what does South Africa need right now as we face the COVID pandemic, as we face the GBV crisis, and as we face the economic crisis. We are at junk status and going down further and further every day. We've got high unemployment, and not a single person that has been appointed gives me confidence that those issues are going to be dealt with and that they're going to be dealt with the necessary strength that is required and the necessary creativity. It's ANC recycling people over and over again. And really what South Africa needs to think about is how do we get rid of the ANC and start appointing people who are interested in this country and the development of this country rather than their own internal squabbles and battles. Thank you.
In fact, it was the Star the morning after the announcement that had the headline, Ramaphosa recycles the rot. But let's go back to his maiden to the moment where he was announcing his maiden cabinet back in 2019. Oliver Dickson, Ramaphosa at that time said, if we are to make effective progress in building South Africa, the kind that we all want, it's important that we deploy into positions of responsibility those who are committed, capable, and hardworking, and those who have integrity. With the benefit of hindsight, was that just lip service, or has the president followed through here?
It certainly was lip service. From the day that announcement was made, in that very same announcement which you had just recited, Ramaphosa had said that his ministers will be signing performance agreements with him, right, where their KPIs would be set out in some sort of a contract, and they would be monitored and evaluated against that KPI agreement. It took more than a year for that KPI agreement to actually be formulated and signed. In fact, it only got signed last year, long after that May 8, 2019 election. And so the question then is, which of the people that Ramaphosa retained in his cabinet reshuffle a few days ago met their KPIs? What are these KPIs, and to what extent have they met them? Those who have been removed, what on their KPI contract did they miss, and to what extent did they not fulfill it? We need those answers as the electorate, because we can't just be told about competence and integrity and then be given a cabinet which Asanda has pointed out very clearly is technocratically inept. And if we're going to keep on with a technocratically inept president, then certainly it was just lip service to say that we've been given people with integrity and people with competence. For instance, the Godongwana cloud of corruption that Asanda made reference to, right, is to the tune of 100 million rand. That's not a lot of money. Integrity was the resignation, the voluntary resignation of Nhlanhla Nene, just for merely lying about having met with the Guptas, not having done anything beyond that we had known of at the time. He had lied about it, and that was enough to step down, and Ramaphosa accepted his resignation. That was an act of integrity, right? Reappointing someone who the benefit of time and erasure has sanitized is not an act of integrity, right? Retaining someone in your cabinet that is clearly incompetent, someone who's clearly using the police service as a militaristic force to terrorize poor South Africans and continue to criminalize poverty in South Africa, as we see the South African Police Service having done at the behest of Bheki Cele, for instance, going house to house and taking back like groceries, essential food that people looted during the week of unrest in South Africa. Retaining someone like that in your cabinet is clearly a slap in the face of the concept of integrity. I think there's a mismatch between what you and I consider to be integrity and how Cyril Ramaphosa altogether conceptualizes that, right? But Ramaphosa has unfortunately had the misfortune of having to choose a cabinet from a pool of contaminated candidates. In fact, it could have been any other set of people appointed, and we probably would have had the same arguments, because the problem here is not individuals. The problem here is the ANC body politic at large.
Given what Oliver has said, Matlala, and what the president said when announcing his maiden cabinet, were you taken by surprise about who actually survived this reshuffle?
Thanks, Ayanda. Not necessarily. Remember, as Oliver has pointed out, that Ramaphosa had only a limited pool of people to elect this new cabinet from, and the initial cabinet. Remember, the constitution is very clear. Cabinet can only be drawn from National Assembly members, essentially members of parliament, and with the exception of only 2 individuals outside of that. So the options that Ramaphosa is exposed to is only MPs from the ANC. Look, the constitution does not buy him from appointing opposition party members. But to manage politics, we know that that is not necessarily going to happen. Already there's Patricia de Lille at the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure. But it's more about the pool that he draws this cabinet from. And secondly, just to highlight on what Asanda said earlier, is the cabinet fit for purpose? Look, I don't think the answer is a simple yes or no. The purpose of cabinet is multifaceted. It's not necessarily, bringing technocratic skills alone. It also brings in the ability to manage crisis, to bring that popular leadership as well. Popular leadership from a perspective that, look, when you have ministers appointed in cabinet, society must find confidence in these individuals. It's about political trust, something that we have seen declining over the past few administrations. Secondly, in terms of crisis management, I think we have witnessed several crises during Cyril Ramaphosa's presidency. First, it was the COVID-19 pandemic. While we're still in the very pandemic, we had the unrest that happened a few weeks ago. These 2 crises actually exposed the deficiencies within President Cyril Ramaphosa's cabinet. For instance, the departure or the axing of the Minister of Defense from the cabinet could be credited to her inability to manage the crisis very well, or at least an uncoordinated communication about what transpired in the past few weeks. So in short, the purpose of cabinet is multifaceted. Ramaphosa, in appointing cabinet, he takes this multifaceted purpose of cabinet into account. He has to balance a number of things in terms of the ability to inspire confidence from society at large, the ability to oversee policy implementation from these very ministers that he has appointed, and also the ability to manage crisis amongst others. And ultimately, the pool that he draws from is very limited. So those are the 2 main points that I would like to highlight.
Sure. Matlala Setlhalogile, Asanda Ngoasheng, and Oliver Dickson are my guests as we continue to unpack whether or not President Cyril Ramaphosa has appointed a cabinet fit for purpose or one that just consolidates his power. If the answer is the latter, can we expect the president perhaps to act less like a man with his hands tied for decisions to come? We'll unpack that aspect of our discussion when we continue unpacking the newly configured cabinet announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa in the week gone by. And for that discussion, we have Asanda Ngoasheng, who's an analyst, Matlala Setlhalogile, who's a political risk analyst, and Oliver Dickson, a commentator. Asanda, let's throw the ball back into your court. Many people have rightly pointed out that it's taken a long time to get here, to a point where Ramaphosa actually makes this cabinet reshuffle. Among the commentary given was that he was a man largely in a tight corner. To many, the situation has changed drastically. Does that to you mean we should expect a whole lot more forthcoming president who doesn't take as long to make decisions in the future?
No, I don't think so. I think that we have an ANC that has ensured that the president is in some ways paralyzed, because the ANC is literally split, not down the middle, but it's split, into big enough chunks to be constantly in opposition of each other and constantly fighting. And part of what Cyril Ramaphosa was supposed to do is do his best to get rid of as many of the people who were involved in the events that we saw when South Africa was destabilized, who are within the ANC. And he's continuing to fail to do that, because although he's gotten rid of Carl Niehaus and Ismail Khashule was suspended, etc., etc., there's still quite a large chunk of Jacob Zuma supporters, of RET, people within the cabinet, within the NEC, who should be gone by now if he was more decisive. And I think also we keep sort of locking ourselves into this thing where South Africa is about the ANC and South Africa is about the NEC of the ANC and their ability. And what we keep missing is a few things. One of which is, I don't agree with Matlala about, his options. he is the president of the country, he is the president of the ANC, he does have the ability to appoint new members of parliament so that he can then appoint them into the cabinet. And so if he had widened that pool by doing that, then we would have more people. I think that there are also a whole lot of other options that as the ANC and as the leader of the ANC and the leader of the country, that he could look into in terms of which kind of candidates he can go with and which kind of candidates he wants to present as solutions to South Africa's many, many, many problems. And I think that, even this idea that, yes, of course, cabinet has more than one requirement beyond technocracy. However, you need people who South Africans are going to trust. So Matlala talks about, needing popular people. I'm not sure who he's talking about because none of the people that he's talking about are necessarily popular in terms of South Africa. Maybe they're popular in terms of the ANC. Maybe they have clout in terms of the ANC. But in terms of the South African electorate, they're not necessarily the most popular people. He's retained people like Angie Motshekga, who continuously fails every single year. If you look at, various newspapers have ratings for her, and she's failed every single one, every single year, and nothing gets done about her. I could literally go down the cabinet and say the same thing for almost every single minister. So I'm trying to understand where this popularity he's talking about comes from. And really popularity, yes, it's important, but ultimately what you need is people who can do the job. Because if you can do the job, I, as a South African citizen, don't necessarily have to like you, but I will be happy that, somebody is in the position and is doing the job. And back to this idea of Godongwana, I keep harping on about it because economics, much like politics, is as much about perception as it is about fact. And so he could, have apologized, have paid the money and all the, the explanations that were being given, but that's not good enough. As Oliver said, integrity needs and requires a little bit more than that, because nobody wants to be sitting and thinking about investing in a South Africa that still hasn't brought to book people for the PPE scandals and now have holding the purse strings a person who still hasn't sorted out their corruption allegations. And you must remember that this is even more important these days because we're coming from a captured finance minister of Malusi Gigaba. And so you don't want another potential, another person with the potential to be captured, which Godongwana has shown himself to be corruptible already. And so you don't want a person who's corruptible in as, important a position as a finance portfolio. And I think that one of the things we really need to consider is how is this going to play out in the international markets? How is this going to play out with also internal investors? Because, again, we like to talk about, international investors, and I think they're important and we should consider them. But one of the main people we need to think about is South African investors. How do I, as a South African, who maybe has a little extra money to buy another house, who maybe has a little extra money to start a business, who maybe has a little extra money to invest in this country in one way or another, how am I going to do that when I do not have confidence that there will be a South Africa in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, if the ANC continues in its current trajectory? And that is what we need to consider when we make decisions like putting together a cabinet over and above consolidating your own power. How are you making sure that the people who put actual rands and cents into your fiscus, whether it's through tax or through business, are going to continue to be interested in doing so and are going to continue to want to do so? Right now, we are seeing more and more people emigrate. And what's interesting about this round of immigrations is it's not just white people leaving. It is black people. And it is some of your most skilled, talented black people who are leaving. And that is a huge problem because this country requires as many skills as we have. And we already have a problem of a shortage of skills and experience. And so if you are already losing the skill that you have spent so much time and money putting together, so much time and money working on, we really, really are going down a very scary path at this point in time.
We'll speak about the optics around Enoch Godongwana and several other people who are appointed in just a moment. First, Matlala, let me give you an opportunity to respond to Asanda's initial remarks. Popularity, surely, she says, can't be a criteria used in some respects for this cabinet.
Just before I get into that point, I'm shocked to learn that the president has the power to appoint members of parliament. I mean, my knowledge of South Africa's policy and regulatory framework is for the first time come across that. There's no such. MPs are elected through party list system. When we go to elections, no president has the power to appoint members of parliament. That's the first thing. Secondly, I think Asanda misconstrues the concept of popular leadership. Look, I did indicate that cabinet has a multifaceted purpose. Popular leadership does not necessarily mean that an individual needs to be popular, but essentially means that the leadership elected or the cabinet appointed needs to inspire confidence among the citizenry. That's the concept of popular leadership, not popularity that people speak of musicians being popular. No, that's not the kind of popularity we speak of in terms of popular leadership. When we speak in terms of the functions or in the roles of cabinet generally in society. And I'd just like to make another point while I'm on that. South Africans are more concerned about politics of the optics, playing to the gallery in terms of cabinet reshuffles. We've seen in the past president in his 9-year tenure, I think he reshuffled cabinet about 12 times. To what effect did he reshuffle cabinet so many times? The reality is that the crisis or the problems of South Africa does not stem from who occupies cabinet seat, but rather the underlying root causes of South Africa's misfortunes is the weak state capabilities and capacity. The key thing here is to improve and galvanize state capacity. Remember that public institutions were weakened over the years of the state capture years. That's the main thing that needs focus right now. Whether you change ministers every 6 months or not, if Sophie, Gerrit, or Abraham cannot perform a task, changing a minister won't miraculously make them to perform that task. The focus of government should be directed towards professionalizing the public service. Political will still lacks. I would comment again while on that issue of state capacity. I think one of my panelists here as well indicated that they do not know the kind of KPIs that ministers were given. How were they shifted from one minister to the other? I would give an example of Senzo Mkhunu. He did a stellar job at the Department of Public Service and Administration. Besides avoiding, a looming public sector strike, he also fast-tracked the processes of improving state capacity within the public service. Why, when someone has started such a process and that process had gained momentum and it's going at the necessary or the required speed, the requisite speed, do you then move that person to a completely new ministry? Those are some of the questions that I think we need to ask, the kind of criteria that was used to move one person from this ministry to the next, especially given the kind of performance that some of them exhibited in the ministries that they held. But in short, Ayanda, the president has no power to appoint members of parliament. And secondly, popular leadership is not about a person being popular, but about inspiring confidence in society, which I agree that the current cabinet lacks, by the way. But I was just wanted to highlight that the purpose of cabinet is multifaceted. Thanks.
Sure. Part of what Matlala has also had to say, Oliver, is that it doesn't matter how often you actually reshuffle a cabinet in a context where those people are essentially entering into a already dysfunctional system because the state has somewhat been hollowed out. To what extent do you agree with that?
That's right. I mean, if the pool that you're choosing from is continuously contaminated, continuously politicized to the point where it hamstrings you, then it doesn't matter how many times you reshuffle the cabinet. If you don't get strategic political alignment in your cabinet, then it really doesn't matter how many times you realign it, right? Your cabinet is only as good as your political vision set out. And to be quite honest, I can ask you, Ayanda, what is Ramaphosa's political vision? And I could ask any of the other panelists. You can ask any group of 5 South Africans. They'll all give you a different answer. That's because we don't know what the political vision of the Ramaphosa administration is, or Ramaphosa himself, let alone his cabinet members. I mean, Ramaphosa spoke recently about the 350 relief grants being reinstated, and that being a step towards a discussion about a basic universal income grant. And then this morning, the Sunday Times tells us that his newly appointed Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, thinks that you're hamstringing the poor by giving them some sort of social relief, and that grants are a handout. I'm sorry, but there you have a finance minister who's inherently anti-poor, and a president who's trying to get a pro-poor alignment, and clearly there's a political disjoint over there. So that gives you an example of the misunderstanding of poverty between the finance minister and the president. That's the first. But I think the point Asanda was trying to make, which Matlala perhaps misconstrued a little bit, is that Ramaphosa does in effect have the ability to broaden his pool to choose from, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that he has to appoint members of parliament, because Matlala is right, the president can't appoint members of parliament, but the political party can deploy members to parliament insofar as the top six ask them to do that, and insofar as that the members they are deploying to parliament are going to be added to the pool of ministers to which the president will look at, right? An example of that having happened was in 2016, actually, when the weekend special of Des van Rooyen happened, right? Not long before that, Brian Molefe, having stepped down from Eskom, was appointed a member of parliament by the Jacob Zuma administration. By the way, Brian Molefe was not even an ANC member in good standing at the time, right? His membership forms was doctored overnight, and an FNB employee, by the way, got fired because she had to backdate the membership fee transaction of 150 Rand, I think it was, right? And there we saw the president appointing through the party a member into parliament with the intention of appointing that person as a member in their cabinet. Ramaphosa could have done the same, right, Matlala? But unfortunately, to your point, Matlala, it's not going to change any of his options and make them any better, right? And so really what the president would have done there is commit political suicide, because he really needs to tread carefully between the factions. And there's a myth here that there's only two ANC factions, a Ramaphosa faction or a Ace Magashule de facto Jacob Zuma faction. The reality is that there's more than two factions in the ANC, right? And what we're likely to see in the next couple of months is a breakaway faction from either one of those two factions, more likely the Ramaphosa faction, a faction that is slightly more ambitious, a faction that will make use of Ramaphosa's weakened popularity within the party to perhaps rise to power. And that faction could be led by any one of his top six members. It could be led by Didi Mabuza, for instance, or it could be led by Paul Mashatile, who's been reported to have long started working the ground to that effect, right? And we might just see that breakaway happening, and the consolidation of power and the power play in the political field changes drastically. A final point to make on this, around the point of optics, which has come up in both instances, is that Ramaphosa is playing to optics, but he's playing to optics badly, because what he's trying to satisfy is the geriatric class in the ANC, and not really reinvigorating new power into the ANC and new energy into the ANC through young people who can mobilize quicker, who can mobilize better, and who have better ideas as far as aligning with the ANC's political objectives are concerned, right? The fact that the bulk of the newly appointed ministers are all really mostly above 60 points to the fact that he's playing optics to that extent. Insofar as he appointed younger people, right, and here I would make reference to our minister who used to be our Minister of Small Business Development, now being in a different ministry, Nkubuto Njabeni, for instance, being a key player for Ramaphosa in the Limpopo province, and Mameluko Kubai, for instance, being a key player for Ramaphosa in quelling whatever dissatisfaction the Ramaphosa administration faced and may face coming out of the Northwest, given that she was the ANC delegate in charge of the task team to take care of what was happening in the Northwest, shows you that he's hoping to keep those people there to once again regain power, well, not regain power, but retain power, really, with the next elective conference, and hopefully win by a bigger margin, right? And Mondli Gugumbele, for instance, is again someone who he chose because the Eastern Cape is a valuable province for him, and power needs to be consolidated over there, right? In the absence of our former Deputy Finance Minister, who miraculously disappeared after he was offered 600 million rand by the Guptas. And so to that extent, he's playing optics, but he's playing it badly. And I think if at best we were to go by optics, there were much better choices he could have made.
Got you. Oliver Dickson, Matlala Setlhalogile, and Asanda Ngoasheng are my guests as we continue unpacking President Cyril Ramaphosa's newly configured cabinet. So much has been said around the decision to take state security and placing that under the presidency. What questions should you and I be asking about that move? We'll unpack that part of the discussion in just a moment. We're in conversation with Asanda Ngoasheng, an analyst, Matlala Setlhalogile, a political risk analyst, and Oliver Dickson, who's a commentator, as we continue unpacking President Cyril Ramaphosa's newly configured cabinet. And Asanda, a lot has been said in the days gone by around the decision to move essentially state security under the presidency. This has happened in the past before, but among the questions being asked is, who exactly is Zizikota deputizing where we no longer have a state security minister?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I just want to go back a little bit to the idea of the pool. I mean, I think Oliver, expanded on it a little bit, but I think what I was actually saying is, as the president of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa does have the power to engage members in order to appoint, as has been said, both people within the ANC and also people who may not necessarily be in the usual pool of the ANC. Because you must remember that the ANC has a lot of people who sit at ANC branch level who do have qualifications and who are actually in some ways capable for the portfolios that we're talking about right now. And so they're not actually only limited to NEC and MPs. They're only limited to NEC and MPs as far as they limit themselves, and can always bring in more people in the same way that when somebody dies or when somebody resigns, they do that. People have been known to be asked to resign before in order to bring in new people. And so there's all these options that he should have taken. And yes, of course, the system is rotten and the system is problematic, but it does make a difference who is in leadership in order to steer the system away from the current rot. And so I don't think that we should throw away the baby with the bathwater and say it doesn't matter who he elects into leadership. We need somebody to lead us out of this current quagmire. And even though the system itself is rotten, the leadership still does have an impact on how far out of the crisis we're in we can get out, or how far further into crisis we can go. And then going back to the issue of state intelligence, I've already spoken about how I personally don't have any confidence in Zizikota to be intelligencing anything at this point, having seen, his propensity for corruption. And I think also that, as I've said, it's not about whether it's possible, has been done or hasn't been done before. It's about the fact that you have a president who's just brought in the intelligence into his presidency, number one. Number two, the regular use of soldiers for what is actually police work. Number three, the increase, as announced by the previous finance minister, in money for South African National Defence Force, which was, a third of what was given to the police. What we need more of is police. What South Africa needs more of is regular police and policing, in order to ensure that some of the things that we see, the levels of crime, even this insurgency, had we had proper police capacity, we would have never had to bring in soldiers. And so if you look across the continent, whether you're talking Zimbabwe, or you're talking Kenya, or you're talking Swaziland, or anywhere else on the continent, once you have the use of police and soldiers interchangeably, it does lead to securitization of the state. It does lead to an erosion of whatever democratic principles are in place, because soldiers are not trained for civic disobedience. They are trained for war, and even when they're trained for peacekeeping, it's a different kind of training. And so we can't keep pulling soldiers and bringing them in when our police capacity fails, and then not do anything to increase our police capacity, particularly as we've seen the ways in which our soldiers act and the ways in which our police act, particularly against black people who also happen to be poor. It's really quite problematic how we are doing our security and the ways in which we are doing policing. And that needs to be reviewed and not, pushed in the direction that it's going now. Those are my concerns.
Oliver, we're learning through the city press today that police are already on high alert to, monitor so-called hotspots in the lead-up to former President Jacob Zuma appearing in court. Do you reckon this new configuration, coupled with the new security cluster, are able to rise to the challenge in terms of protecting citizens, given the questions that still linger around our ability to respond to intelligence, let alone gathering it?
Look, Ramaphosa faces a unique problem when it comes to intelligence. And the problem he's been facing with regards to intelligence is that state intelligence has, since before he became president, worked against him, right? So we'll remember in the run-up to Newzroom in 2017, the leaking of Ramaphosa's private emails, where we learned that he's a philanderer calling people cupcake. That was the work of intelligence. And then came the time he became president. Even after he became president, we saw the massive expose about the CR17 bank statements in independent news. That again was the work of intelligence. Even when he was president, intelligence worked against him, right? And so Ramaphosa has had to find ways to neutralize somehow the counterintelligence operatives working against him within the intelligence infrastructure, right? And I guess to him, one of the solutions is drawing intelligence closer to him, which is not necessarily inherently a bad thing, and which is not automatically suspicious, right? Because it is quite normal across the world for presidents to try and fashion an intelligence community that they can have direct oversight. And for instance, in America, the president gets daily intelligence briefings. Every single morning when he wakes up at 5 a.m., the first thing he does is go down into the intelligence bunker where he receives an intelligence briefing, right? Top secret intelligence briefing telling him about the latest threat analysis in the country, right? We don't know that Ramaphosa receives that, but we hope that he will start receiving that, right? We hope that bringing it closer to the presidency, wherever there's where there's a lapse in intelligence, we can hold him directly accountable for it, right? Because he's the political overseer thereof. Is Zizi Kodwa the right person to be deputizing him? Absolutely no. This is a person who not so long ago insulted our collective intelligence as a country when he told us that he has a precarious employment trajectory and that he does not know that he will remain in gainful employment. Therefore, he cannot pay back a R1 million loan that he made from his EOH buddy, McKay. And to that extent, we must believe that he's living in some sort of poverty when he used that very same R1 million for buying a 800,000 rand Jeep, right? That is not a guy that should be at the behest of our intelligence. One who we know is easily bribable, but two, one that we know has zero integrity. So that guy must be removed. But I don't think I necessarily understand, and I'm going to be brief here, I don't think I necessarily agree with Asanda that the interchangeable use of the military and the police spells a problematic move towards the securitization of the state, and that the securitization of the state is necessarily a bad thing. One, it is not true that the military is not trained for civil obedience. In fact, they are trained for civil obedience. In fact, they're trained for high-level civil obedience. The high level of civil obedience that we saw during the week of unrest is exactly that which the military is trained for, right? But it is what it is indicative of is an undercapacitated police service. The fact that we have to bring in the military every now and then when the police, for instance, can't meet the security requirements and the obedience requirements of the country. And we've known this for a very long time. Begitele has also conceded to this. In fact, what the United Nations has told us is that South Africa's police service is understaffed by at least 100,000 police officers. We've long known this. And so we will see a continued continuous interchange between the use of the police and the military service for as long as our police service remains understaffed. The fact that the military is surrounding the SABC is incredibly worrisome, and in fact what we do need is urgent answers from the presidency about why they thought that to be necessary.
Got you. Oliver, thanks very much indeed. Matlala, I am terribly sorry, but we are woefully out of time, and to be frank, the time we have together was never going to be enough. So let me thank you all for your time and your indulgence this afternoon. Asanda Ngoasheng, an analyst, Matlala Setlhalogile, a political risk analyst, and Oliver Dickson, a commentator. Once again, my deepest appreciation to all three of you.